Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So we are now in July, we've passed the halfway point of the year, and so I wanted to take stock of my reading by talking about the best books that I've read so far in 2024. I mean, at this point we are contractually obligated as booktubers to do this video. I've got 6 great books to recommend to you today, and I'm going to go in a rough kind of order of preference, but please be assured all of these are hearty recommends. And I'm also really pleased to see that I've actually got 2 non-fiction books on this list. I feel like I was in a bit of a drought last year when it came to great non-fiction reads. Starting off, we have Blue Stockings, the first women's movement by Susanna Gibson. This is an 18th century history, which essentially is a group of biographies of these pioneering intellectual women, the Blue Stockings, who would get together in their homes and host these literary salons, talking about art, literature, sciences, but in a conventionally, societally respectable way, because at the time an intellectual woman was perceived to be absolutely unacceptable, monstrous, and these women were really paving the way to show that that wasn't the case. We are looking at figures like Elizabeth Montagu, Fanny Burney, Hester Frail, Catherine Macaulay, looking at their lives, their impacts, particularly on the generations that came after, the social conventions of the time, but also this book is not afraid to dig into ways in which these women were quite backwards in their thinking, not as inclusive as they could have been, where they really fell short, particularly when it came to class and race, and also whenever members of their group transgressed and how they would quickly drop them, particularly looking at sex and marriage and the way that they dealt with any perceived indiscretions. I've been fascinated by the Blue Stockings as figures since I learned about them during my masters. I'm really glad that there is now a popular history talking about them, and it's one that I think definitely more people should read. And then my second non-fiction recommendation is also 18th century. Apparently I couldn't get enough of that this year, and it is Love and Marriage in the Age of Jane Austen by Rory Muir. Definitely a great pick to pick up this month for Jane Austen July. In this, Rory Muir is meticulously diving into the customs around love, courtship and marriage in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, picking apart letters, diary entries and other sources from this time period. He provides this comprehensive explanation to the rituals, the societal norms, customs and relationships between men and women, and how they would end up inspiring and informing the characters that Jane Austen would write, and is going from every stage of relationships, from courtship to marriage, early married life, children, jobs, all the way through to death and widowhood. He really challenges this common perception that Georgian marriages were often unhappy and adulterous, showing marriages that were affectionate, or at the very least were content and calm. I really love his writing style. It is engaging and accessible while still delivering a lot of information and sources. If you are a Jane Austen fan, if you're a fan of Regency, if you're a fan of Bridgerton, you should definitely pick this up. Staying with my beloved Regency period, the first fiction book I have to show for you is A Lady's Guide to Scandal by Sophie Irwin. I picked this up after absolutely loving her first book, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, but this does depict a very different story, very different protagonist from that book. In this book we're following the main character of Eliza, who is recently widowed and is navigating this newfound freedom in the wake of her husband's death and him leaving her an enormous sum that was quite unexpected. However, there is a catch attached to this fortune. She must avoid any whiff of scandal, otherwise she will have to give it back, under the watchful eye of the new Earl of Somerset, who was the man who she had rejected earlier in her youth. Fleeing to Bath with her cousin Margaret, Eliza embarks on this journey of self-discovery, learning who she is without the constraints of men, but along the way encountering both her former love as well as this charming but quite notorious writer who complicates her feelings even further. There is a lot of inspiration in this book from Jane Austen's Persuasion, but Sophie Irwin really does twist that story. A real highlight for me was Sophie Irwin's character development, particularly with Eliza, taking her from being this quite passive character to a woman who is embracing her own newfound independence, and she does a really great job of balancing both the romance and the character development. As you might be able to tell from the plot, there is a bit of a love triangle in this book, but for me it truly was a bit of a decision, and I wasn't sure until quite late on in the book like who the right person was, because I feel like both of these men are characterized really well. And yeah, just another really delightful Regency romance from this author, with homage to classic literature while being its own thing. A very different kind of historical fiction with a very different tone is In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. Everybody was absolutely raving about this book last year, and I finally got around to it, and I definitely see why. In this book we're following the intertwined lives of Sidney Elwood and Henry Gaunt, best friends from boarding school, who are studying at this elite school in the English countryside upon the break of World War I. Both boys secretly harbour romantic feelings for the other, but of course society at this time and personal fears of rejection keep them from confessing their love to each other. Societal and familial pressure end up resulting in Henry enlisting early, particularly to drive suspicion away from his family due to their German heritage. He enlists and soon becomes captain, Elwood, not being able to stay away from his best friend, enlists soon after, and the two end up facing the brutalities of war together. This book really focuses on the psychological impact of war, the major themes of this book being mental health, evolving relationships, and loss of innocence. How boys end up having to turn to men overnight due to the horrors that they see. They originally treat it kind of like another one of their school games, but gradually become detached and numb to their experiences. Alice Wynne is able to really vividly describe the horrors of war, the random unpredictability of injury and death, and how characters cope to this trauma in different ways. Through this book, we are following Elwood and Gaunt's perspectives, jumping from one to the other, and she's able to do this seamlessly in a way that creates suspense while keeping that emotional attachment to these characters. You are constantly wanting to know what is going to happen next for each of their stories, and despite how grim it is still a very human, a very emotional story. A shorter but no less poignant recommendation is Foster by Claire Keegan. I have fully jumped onto the Claire Keegan bandwagon this year. I've read 3 of her books so far and they've all been fantastic, but this is definitely my favourite so far. This is a poignant, emotional, beautiful little novella set in rural Ireland in the 1980s. We are following a young unnamed girl who is sent to live with a foster family while her very overwhelmed parents prepare for the birth of yet another child. We get the sense that she is being quite emotionally neglected by her parents, but through her time with the Kinslers is shown real warmth and affection and care, and develops a real sense of belonging over the time that she spends with them, which is both heartwarming and heartbreaking knowing how this book is going to end with her going back to her family. I was mesmerised by Keegan's ability to evoke the landscape and the culture of rural Ireland. In such a short amount of pages, she just has this crisp, elegant prose with not a word out of place, not a single word wasted, and it really brings the story to life. The book's major themes being the importance of love and kindness in a child's life, and demonstrating how even the smallest act of kindness and compassion can have profound and long-lasting impacts on their lives. It was beautiful, it was powerful, it made me cry. Maybe the only book this year that did that. This and In Memoriam, I would say. And yeah, couldn't get enough of it. More Claire Keegan, please. And then the final and probably my favourite book that I read this year is the final book in a trilogy. Almost never happens, but this author really stuck the landing, and it was The Temple of Fortuna by Elodie Harper, the 3rd book in the Wolf Den trilogy. I have done a full review for this book and all of the other books, I think, aside from Blue Stockings, and I do dig more into the plot of the first 2 books. Please go to that video, read the first 2 books, and then come back to this one. But in this one, we are following Amara in 79 AD, the first book having taken place in 74 AD. Amara is in Rome as concubine to her patron Demetrius. The novel opens up with the funeral of the Emperor Vespasian and the rise of his successor Titus. And through the early part of the book, we are really seeing the precarious position held by mistresses in the Roman society that Amara is living in. Following a life-threatening incident, Amara is sent back to Pompeii, and as a result has to confront the emotional and moral implications of her past actions. Of course, knowing that this book takes place in 79 AD in Pompeii, we kind of know where this book is going. As the narrative builds towards the impending eruption of Mount Vesuvius, Elodie Harper really takes the chance to give a lot of these characters like their final bow, their swan song, and it really allows her characters to shine for potentially the last time, while also building up the tension in the background of the eruption that we know is going to come. And when it does come, it is spectacular to read. It is so vividly described, such harrowing details that leave you on the edge of your seat. I started reading this as I was going to bed, and that was the wrong decision on my part, I will admit, because I just had to keep going. This eruption forcing characters into making these crucial life or death decisions, both tearing down and upholding the class distinctions of this society and forcing these people to confront the humanity of others and how do people respond. And the climax of this book is just devastating to read. You feel the chaos, you feel the terror. It can be argued that this book starts off quite slow, but once you get to the eruption, you kind of see why the slow pace was needed. It was just breathtaking to read. And just ultimately this book was a fantastic conclusion to this trilogy. The way that Elodie Harper has throughout these 3 books been able to weave together the historical detail with her original characters, building on each one, adding complexity to these figures, to the choices that they have to make, never pulling her punches with the realities of the life that these women have to live. I'm talking about it now and I just want to go back to the beginning and go through all of these books again. An absolutely fantastic series, a brilliant end to it, and I'm definitely looking forward to her next book, which is all about Boudica, or I believe Boudica's daughter. I'm absolutely picking up anything else that Elodie Harper writes. So there we go, those are my 6 favourite books of the year so far. Please do let me know if you've read any of these, and please also give me recommendations of your favourite books of the year. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.